All right, let's talk about another type of injury or damage that is not included in our each occurrence limit. So it needs its own limit in general liability section, and that is personal and advertising injury. So personal advertising is going to cover such disparate and intangible damages as violation of privacy, libel or slander, copyright infringement. This is personal and advertising injury. And so we have a special limit for that. So let's look at this lease excerpt. I know that this font is a little bit small, but we're just going to zoom in to where this blue box is drawing our attention to 1 million for personal and advertising liability. All right, so that corresponds pretty neatly with this limit for personal advertising injury in the general liability section. All right, in this case, 1 million was required in the lease and 2 million evidenced in the COI. Well, that's great news. We have more than was required. That is compliant. All right, now before we move on from personal and advertising, I just want to say that leases are written by legal professionals, not necessarily people who have a lot of exposure, interaction, or experience with insurance. So sometimes the way that the lease expresses things does not line up so well with the way insurance professionals and insurance policies express things. One example of this is personal injury. So you might be tempted to think that this is personal advertising injury whenever it appears in the lease. Sometimes it won't be. All right, so looking at this example here, we see that there's a general liability policy required, and we need 3 million per occurrence for bodily injury or death, personal injury, and or damage to property. Okay, so we have 3 different types of damages described here. And what is the difference between bodily injury and personal injury? Well, we said personal injuries are more of those intangible damage. But in the legal sphere, personal injury is actually a much broader class of claims that could encompass injury or death, physical ailments, physical injuries, as well as the intangible psychological, social injuries. In this case, we don't have a limit here given for personal injury, right? We don't have a separate limit. And we know that on a COI, there's a separate limit for personal advertising injury. Okay, so would we be taking that 3 million per occurrence and applying that to personal advertising injury? If you ask me, the answer is no. And again, sometimes we have to read between the lines here and interpret, because there is a disconnect between the leases and the COIs. But what I'm hearing reading this is that they want a combined single limit of 3 million. All right, if you watch the last unit, the last episode, we discussed 3 million per each occurrence being a combined single limit that combines bodily injury and property damage, right? I think that's what this requirement is saying. It's not saying anything about personal advertising intentionally, all right? In this case, personal injury is a redundant word. Probably the intention is bodily injury or death here, and we would not be taking this as a personal advertising requirement because personal advertising does not fit into the combined single limits. And sometimes leases are not written in a way that is very clear or intuitive for those of us who work in insurance. So I just wanted to make that distinction clear. All right, products